Hello, everyone. So I am back with just another request to help me prepare for something. So in a future Twitter Spaces, so if you don't know, I co-host a great Twitter space on philosophy with a fellow friend and philosopher of mine, Christopher Sator. And so we are going to talk to the wonderful and brilliant Dr. Amber Bowen, who wrote her dissertation on Kierkegaard and is working, I think, with like literary hermeneutical circles as well. And we're going to talk about, as far as I know, Fear and Trembling, which fortunately I have read. So I think it's great when we can focus on a text. So thank you to Dr. Bowen for suggesting that. All right, so what I'm going to do is just read through some of Fear and Trembling, starting just from the preface. There's a lot of great information in the introduction, but I think I'm just going to skip that for now. I've read it and made notes on it. I actually looked at Fear and Trembling in a reading group with, I can't remember. There's two big reading groups on meetup.com, but they kind of overlap and utilize, I guess, members. Like they just don't seem separate in terms of members. So one's in Toronto and I think one's in Seattle. So I can't remember which one was hosting it. So I know Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard, that's how I'm going to pronounce his name, with probably an incorrect accent, from his work, The Present Age, on the death of rebellion. And so what I got from that is that he really wants people to kind of navigate life in greater depth. It seemed as if he was kind of making a criticism of the culture of his time, that they, loved spectacle, they loved sort of drama and sort of this feigned heroic kind of promise or representation. But neither the hero nor the audience kind of cheering the hero on really wants to go very far. They kind of just are kind of surrounded by sort of the joy of gossip and advertisements, and, or I could say that like an American advertisements, ads, and sometimes I just want to be British, I guess. So just kind of, and I think we could make sort of correlations to time, to sort of trends today, maybe in, let's say, American culture, because that's what I know, of sort of the idolization and constant talk and news about, say, like celebrities or people that are just famous for being famous. That gets thrown around a lot. Are people really doing heroic things? You could probably point to that for sure. But I think Kierkegaard just wanted to see more of that, of an actual true heroism. He wants us to have a sort of a depth of being and passion and do more in our social circles than just have conversations about the superficial. So that's what I got reading this, and it was quite a while ago, maybe like 2017 when I read it, and just absolutely loved it because, like I said, I felt like he was almost talking about my world, and just a lot could be applied to it. So Fear of Trembling takes the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Hebrew scriptures and kind of uses it to discuss I think probably the same thing from the present age and on the death of rebellion, but I'll have to ask Dr. Bowen what she thinks about that, what his actual intention is. I think she says something like building up the self, and she looks at, as far as I know, the sort of, or she has like a preference for seeing the self as the relational self. Like the relational self is really the only self that we have. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes me think of the experiment that was done somewhere at a certain time. This was, 15 years ago when I was in abnormal psychology in undergrad. I heard of this, but it just stuck with me that there was this experiment that psychologists did with babies, and they fed the babies, they provided for all of their basics, like sort of physical needs, but they didn't end up, I hope the story is true. Well, I mean, I hope it's not true because it's horrific, but I'm just saying, I hope I'm not giving you inaccurate information. This was the story that I was told, and it was told to me as if it actually happened. So I think it did. I probably should have researched that before, but we'll just say it. And then but they didn't touch the babies. They didn't really have any relational communication that was tactile. Like the people that were in charge of feeding the babies and making sure they had their physical needs, their physiological needs met, didn't like look at them, I think, like affectionately, or try to like communicate even without touching, but by like facial expressions. It was just, they wanted to see how they would develop without a relationship. And then they died. I'm going to look that up to see if that actually happened. It's just so horrific. I'm like, yeah. But I think that kind of gives evidence to sort of this idea or this argument or proposition that you really do need other people, or to be aware of even the entities in your environment in a meaningful way in order to be a self. Some might argue that, well, I can isolate myself, and even if no one was around, even if I didn't recognize my environment as having any sort of consciousness or any sort of life or any sort of meaning or significant, etc., I would still be a self. But I would agree with Dr. Bowen that maybe that you would slowly perish as well, not only emotionally and mentally, but physically. You wouldn't live very long, because we can all see how our minds and bodies are connected and intertwined, and how you do live longer if you talk to people and get hugs and are in meaningful relationships. And I think that you have to have that for survival, and you're certainly not a self if you don't have existence. So I think that's really interesting. I don't remember when I was reading Fear and Trembling as my group talking about that at all, the self. Actually, it kind of delved into kind of just looking at the Abrahamic story and seeing how, particular readings were ethically problematic. So, but I'm hoping to kind of, and that's what I can remember from the reading group. So I'm hoping to kind of take a fresh start, a fresh look at, or a new beginning, a second beginning of Fear and Trembling just on my own. I think it's really great to learn in community. But it's just kind of like reading commentary, as sometimes you got influenced in a certain way that you might not otherwise have been if you just read the primary text first and on your own. So pros and cons of that. All right, so let's start and let's see if I have any ideas, because it has been a while since I read this and a while since I was in that reading group. Not only in the commercial world, but in the realm of ideas as well, our age is holding a veritable clearance sale. Everything is had so dirt cheap that it's doubtful whether in the end anyone will bid. Every speculative scorekeeper who conscientiously keeps account of the momentous march of modern philosophy, every lecturer, tutor, student, every outsider and insider in philosophy does not stop at doubting everything, but goes further. Perhaps it would be inappropriate and untimely to ask them where they're actually going, but it is surely polite and modest to take it for granted that they have doubted everything, since otherwise it would certainly be peculiar to say that they went further. All of them then have made this preliminary movement, and presumably so easily that they do not find it necessary to drop a hint about how, for not even the one who anxiously and worriedly sought a little enlightenment found so much as an instructive tip or a little dietary prescription on how to conduct oneself under this enormous task. Quote, so someone saying, but Descartes has done it, hasn't he? And quote, I thought, Descartes, a venerable, humble, honest thinker whose writings surely no one can read without the deepest emotion, has done what he has said and said what he has done. Alas, 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 that is a great rarity in our age. So you see that, I mean, he's critiquing his age. And it's rare to do what you say and say what you have done. As he himself reiterates often enough, Descartes did not doubt with respect to faith. At the same time, we should remember, as noted earlier, that the natural light is to be trusted only to the extent that it is compatible with divine revelation. Oh, so this is a quote. Okay, so, and this is a parenthetical as well. Okay, so I think this is, maybe this is another quote from Descartes. At the same time, we should remember, as noted earlier, that the natural light is to be trusted only to the extent that it is compatible with divine revelation. But above all else, we must impress on our memory the overriding rule that whatever God has revealed to us must be accepted as more certain than anything else. And although the light of reason may, with the utmost clarity and evidence, appear to suggest something different, we must still put our entire faith in divine authority rather than in our own judgment. End quote. Descartes has not yelled fire and made it a duty for everyone to doubt, for he was a quiet, solitary thinker, not a bellowing street watchman. He has modestly confessed that his method had importance only for himself and was based partly on his earlier distorted knowledge. So I think that's interesting. I think maybe I haven't been studying Western philosophy for that long. My PhD is in religious studies, but I think this is a call for the validity of a priori knowledge and intuition. So, and where does that intuition, especially at the time of Descartes and Kierkegaard, I would guess, where would that be but from some sort of authoritative source of knowledge? So God, or, whatever anyone's conception of, where we get our internal wisdom from that's beyond us, outside of us, that precedes us. So another quote, my present aim then is not to teach the method which everyone must follow in order to direct his reason correctly, but only how but only to reveal how I have tried to direct my own. But as soon as I had completed the course of study at the end of which one is normally admitted to the ranks of the learned, I completely changed my opinion. For I found myself beset by so many doubts and errors that I came to think I had gained nothing from my attempts to become educated, but increasing recognition of my ignorance, end quote. So I think it's really interesting because, in the beginning, the page before, in the preface, Kierkegaard was saying that, he feels like he's surrounded by a bunch of skeptics. And maybe that's why people can't be passionate or go past their depths, because they don't want to take a risk on any idea or belief or possibility. They're kind of, because skepticism, I think we have seen, doesn't have to, but often skepticism in philosophy, in our philosophic directions, can limit us. Limit us from engaging with possibilities and imagining, and all of that is really required for progress. And I think Kierkegaard is saying probably for like an authentic self and a real self. So Descartes is what he's showing, by kind of looking at Descartes and his sort of crisis of, epistemology, is that he gets stuck. He was so close. He was there when he was saying that, even if I have this intuition, but it's not matching up with what I see, I have to trust the intuition because it's a revelation from God. I mean, you don't really have to continue it you don't have to bring it to that extent, but that's how Descartes articulated it. But, but often our appearances do deceive us, and going on intuition and then trying to test that intuition and return back to appearances, return back to the external world to test and experiment and try to figure out if it has any relation to maybe a deeper understanding or a more accurate understanding, a scientific understanding, basically thinking of the movements of the planets and the sun and the moon, and it from a human's perspective, things look different than they actually are, and we actually articulate our daily experience based on perception and not on technical scientific reality, right? I mean, we know that when we talk about the sunset and everything, that's just kind of a metaphorical language, but maybe there's almost a danger in that. Regardless, Descartes is having a crisis because he keeps getting swept back into his doubt. And I think Kierkegaard wants us all to, go past that and not be paralyzed. So going on, what those ancient Greeks, who also surely understood a little bit about philosophy, assumed to be a task for a whole lifetime, because proficiency in doubting is not achieved in a matter of days and weeks. What was achieved by the old veteran polemicist, which the footnote says an ambiguous reference probably to an early Greek skeptic, who had preserved the equilibrium of doubt through all specious arguments, bravely denied certainty of the senses and of thought, and incorruptibly defied the anxiety of self-love and the innuendos of sympathy with that everyone in our age begins. So defied the anxiety of self-love and the innuendos of sympathy. So that's interesting. So here we get a little bit of relationality, I think, of the self. So he continues, and his complaint is, in our age, nobody stops at faith, but goes further. To ask where they are going would perhaps be foolhardy. However, it is surely a sign of courtesy and good breeding. So he's kind of being repetitive here, I guess, because he says no one stops at doubt, but they go further. And now he's saying no one stops at faith either, but goes further. So it is truly a sign of courtesy and good breeding for me to assume that everyone has faith, since otherwise it would be particular to talk of going further. In those olden days, it was different. Then faith was a lifelong task because it was assumed that proficiency in believing is not achieved in either days or weeks. So you see, like he said the same thing about doubt. When the tried and tested oldster drew near to his end, having fought the good fight and kept the faith, his heart was still young enough not to have forgotten that fear and trembling which disciplined the youth, and was well controlled by the man, but is not entirely outgrown by any person, except in so far as one succeeds in going further as soon as possible. Where those venerable figures arrived, there everyone in our age begins in order to go further. So I think that he's saying that, and of course we have Fear and Trembling, right? The title in English. In the preface right here on my page 5, I'm using the Cambridge text in the History of Philosophy. So he's saying that I think this is kind of an argument for sort of what kind of temporal existence we live. So he's critiquing, it seems, this temporal existence where you go further than you need to with doubt, and you also go further than you need to with faith, to kind of maybe an easy existence where you're just exchanging like one doubt for another and one emphasis of importance or interest by another. So, and this is a lot what I think contemporary philosophers kind of critique when they're critiquing the hyperactivity of our current age. And they're saying that we don't slow down, that we don't linger. And this is also what Heidegger says. And I'm thinking of Byung-Chul Han. Yeah, I think those are the two people that I've read that I can point to. I'm sure other people say it as well, other writers. But, you know, here Kierkegaard is saying it. He wants faith to be something that is basically a lifelong task, he says. So it's a practice. It's something we continually investigate. So faith is I guess faith is both, I would say, people might disagree with this, that what he's talking about, that faith is not only a means to an end, but also an end in itself. So if it's an end in itself, it's a lifelong practice. The present writer is not at all a philosopher. He has not understood the system, whether it exists or whether it's finished. He already has enough for his weak head in the thought of what huge heads everyone in our age must have, since everyone has such huge thoughts. Even if one were able to convert the whole content of faith into conceptual form, it does not follow that one has comprehended faith, comprehended how one entered into it, or how it entered into one. That almost makes me think of Heidegger. I'm reading What is Called Thinking, and he says that even though our age is preoccupied with thinking, we still don't know how to think. Kind of sounds like what Kierkegaard is saying here. The present writer is not at all a philosopher. He is, poetically and tastefully expressed, a freelancer, who neither writes the system nor makes promises about the system, who neither swears by the system nor pledges himself to the system. He writes because for him it is a luxury that becomes all the more enjoyable and conspicuous the fewer who buy and read what he writes. He easily foresees his fate in an age when passion has been abandoned in order to serve scholarship, in an age when an author who wants readers must take care to write in such a way that his work can be conveniently skimmed through during the after-dinner nap, and take care to fashion his outer appearance in likeness to that polite garden apprentice in the Advertiser, which is a local newspaper, who, with hat in hand and good references from the place where he was last employed, recommends himself to an esteemed public. He foresees his fate of being totally ignored. So it's kind of the difference of, just relating it really to our times. The content creator who does what they do to please the audience and so has to sort of maybe modify what they want, maybe even the deeper sort of investigations of whatever subject they are, or field they're in, to get the views and the likes to be digestible, versus, someone who is purely and sincerely, let's say, staying true to the course of the investigative practices and of their path. So I don't know. It's just, I just love the wit of Kierkegaard, for sure. He has a frightful presentiment that zealous criticism will put him through the mill many times. He dreads what is even more frightful, that one or other enterprising summarizer, a paragraph gobbler, who in order to save scholarship is always willing to do the writings of others what Trope, a character in Heiberg's vaudeville play, magnanimously did with the destruction of the human race in order to save good taste, will cut him up into paragraphs and do it with the same inflexibility as the man who, in service to the system of punctuation, divided his discourse by counting the words so that there were exactly 50 words to a period and 35 to a semicolon. I prostrate myself in deepest deference before every systematic snooper. Quote, "This is not the system. It does not have the least thing to do with the system. I invoke all the best upon the system and upon the Danish investors in this omnibus, for it is not likely to become a tower. I wish them one and all good luck and prosperity." End quote. Respectfully, Johannes de Silentio. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I love it. I love the irony. I love the satire. I love just the political commentary. All right, so we will continue on. Hopefully you're all with me. Tuning up. There was once a man who, as a child, had heard that beautiful story about how God tested Abraham and how he withstood the test, kept the faith, and received a son a second time, contrary to expectation. When the man became older, he read the same story with even greater admiration, for life had separated what had been united in the child's pious simplicity. Indeed, the older he became, the more often his thoughts turned to that story. His enthusiasm became stronger and stronger, and yet he could understand the story less and less. Finally, he forgot everything else because of it. His soul had only one wish, to see Abraham, one longing to have been a witness to that event. His desire was not to see the beautiful regions of the Far East, not the earthly splendor of the Promised Land, not that God-fearing married couple whose old age God had blessed, not the venerable figure of the aged patriarch, not the vigorous youth of Isaac bestowed by God. It would not have mattered to him if the same thing had taken place on a barren heath. His longing was to accompany them on the 3-day journey when Abraham rode with sorrow before him and Isaac on his side. His wish was to be present at the hour when Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw Mount Moriah in the distance, the hour he left the asses behind and went up the mountain alone with Isaac. For what engrossed him was not the artistic weave of the imagination, but the shudder of the thought. That man was not a thinker. He felt no need to go beyond faith. So I guess, it might mean when you go beyond faith, you maybe leave faith and you delve back into reason, which maybe sends you into doubt or sends you into like a false justification. I think Kierkegaard wants us to always be or often be on the precipice. And, sincere about our intention to like jump off, maybe to jump into the other world, to jump into a higher plane, to enact a death and a rebirth again and again and again for constant growth and encounter in a relational world that causes pain and intense joy, but for us to make life worth it by actually feeling it and exposing ourselves, which, creates discomfort, which I think he thinks that his society lacks. They lack the ability to be uncomfortable, to, because other things are prioritized, other things are idolized. And next month, when I get my new book haul, I have spent so much money on books. It's really scary to me and my budget. But I'm going to buy, I'm planning on buying Byung-Chul Han's book on health. I'm hesitating on the title because I don't know how to say it. I forget what the word is. Palliative care. And so, he talks about how we idolize health and we want to make a more and more sterile world, but at what cost? And I think Kierkegaard, maybe he uses Kierkegaard. I don't know. Okay, so that man was not a thinker. He felt no need to go beyond faith. So he stays in the discomfort of faith, but with, infinite rewards. It seemed to him that it must be the greatest glory to be remembered as its father and an enviable lot to possess faith, even if no one knew it. That man was not a learned exegete. He did not know Hebrew. Had he known Hebrew, then perhaps he would easily have understood the story of Abraham. So I guess it's this faith, even this willingness of this, Johannes de Silencio, to read without having the solid, sure, certain backing of even scholarship, of even the knowledge that others have given you. It's just the willingness to throw yourself inside a story and be stirred and have your passion stirred by it. So yeah, and I think that also maybe could be a spot where those who are particularly troubled by a potential reading of the Abrahamic story, which might sort of glorify sacrifice. I think that this, just looking at the reiterations of what we're getting from the story instead of how we should understand the story, and even reiterating that we don't understand what's happening and we don't understand the story. So it's possible that a particular reading of the Abrahamic story is not being promoted, but it's simply an example. The use of this religious text in this book is kind of, and I guess this, is something that I have to continue to think about. But what I feel is that, what I might propose is that, and I'm ready to completely change my mind on this, but it's used as a placeholder for inspiring the kind of mindset and life that Kierkegaard wants. But yet at the same time, I'm sure that it's needed and necessary for something. I mean, it could be just that he thought it was the best. The story held a lot of possibilities. So anyway. And so he gives a scripture and says, "And God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Take Isaac, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering upon a mountain that I will show you.' It was an early morning. Abraham rose early, had the asses saddled, and left his tent, taking Isaac with him. But Sarah looked out the window after them as they went down through the valley until she could see them no more. They rode silently for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day," so that's why I think also Johannes is saying that he wants to be on the journey. He doesn't really care about the other elements of the story. That's not what inspires him. It's this treacherous, uncomfortable journey that one is willing to endure and make because they're passionate. On the morning of the 4th day, Abraham still did not say a word, but lifted up his eyes and saw Mount Moriah in the distance. He left the servant boys behind and went up to the mountain alone, leading Isaac by the hand. But Abraham said to himself, "I will not conceal from Isaac where this path is taking him." He stood still and laid his hand upon Isaac's head for a blessing, and Isaac bowed to receive it. And Abraham's countenance was paternal, his gaze was gentle, his speech exhortatory. But Isaac could not understand him, his soul could not be uplifted. He embraced Abraham's knees, he pleaded at his feet, he begged for his young life, for his fair hopes, he recalled the joy in Abraham's house, he recalled the sorrow and the solitude. So I think this is really interesting because there's space created here for this perspective of the young boy who, in a sense, doesn't have a choice. Then Abraham raised the boy up and walked along, holding his hand, and his words were full of comfort and exhortation. But Isaac could not understand him. He climbed Mount Moriah, but Isaac understood him not. Then he turned away from Isaac a moment, but when Isaac saw Abraham's countenance again, it was changed. His eyes were wild, his appearance a fright to behold. He seized Isaac by the chest, threw him to the ground, and said, "Foolish boy, do you believe that I am your father? I am an idolater. Do you believe this is God's command? No, it is my desire." Then Isaac trembled and cried out in his anguish, "God in heaven, have mercy on me. God of Abraham, have mercy on me. If I have no father on earth, then you be my father." But Abraham murmured under his breath to himself, "Lord in heaven, I thank you. It is surely better for him to believe I am a monster than to lose faith in you." So that's interesting. So I think that, and I think this is what this whole, book of Fear and Trembling is. It's the difficulty and challenge of Johannes de Silencio to try to look at different readings, different possibilities, different confusions in the Abrahamic story. And it's not necessarily the goal to come upon a particular reading of it, but it's in a meta way. I think it is also the journey that Johannes de Silencio is willing to take in struggling with a text that he doesn't understand, but which incites such an important reaction. And he's wrapped up and tied with these characters, and he's trying to imagine the different perspectives of the characters and the figures of faith. And, he has this roller coaster of emotions. And it is a lifelong journey to understand this text for Johannes because, in the beginning it said he read it when he was younger, but when he became older. And I guess I didn't mention my thought on this, but as it says, and yet he could understand the story less and less. I'm also thinking that, it's also because when we get older, we are even more thrown into the world, and we are more embedded with the they, capital T. And we have our adult distractions, and maybe we're kind of compelled, or we fall into leading a more leveled down life. And so it's possible that Johannes de Silencio, in putting the words in Abraham's mouth, "Foolish boy, do you believe I'm your father? I'm an idolater." So it's like he wants to take the shame on himself, even though, so he's being kind of deceptive to himself. He's trying to rationalize how he can have control over the situation to make it a little better. And maybe that would be an example of Johannes projecting his own fears on Abraham, making Abraham go beyond faith into reason and justification, instead of maybe what faith requires, which is, in both like a secular and a theological turn, it's a letting go. It's a letting go of control, but at the same time, it's not passive. So I have read a lot more Heidegger than I have Kierkegaard, so I think I'm looking strangely at Kierkegaard through a Heideggerian lens. But I think that just means that Heidegger maybe also read Kierkegaard like a lot. No, I mean, I know he did. So yeah, it's just, it's their connection. I don't think it's like a false connection that I'm trying to make. Anyway, so I think I'm going to stop there. I'm stopping on page 9. We're almost finished with it, but I think it's just a good stopping point. But thank you. I feel good about trying to remember this story and what it's about. And like I said, I think I'm distanced from the reading group conversation, which was good in itself, but I also want to read it in the way that I think that, just to be open to the text and read it in the way that I might have read it if I wouldn't have heard other opinions. All right, so thank you so much. And yeah, I'll probably make a couple more videos, just kind of reading through as much as I can before we do the Twitter Spaces. And I hope you all join that. It'll be on September 24th.